Welcome to Panels and Borders. I'm Dominic. Batman 1989. It's 30 years old now. A little while ago, I did a podcast style video with a friend of mine where we discussed this movie. And it was a really neat video to do because we had originally seen this movie together when it was out originally in theaters 30 years ago. So it was nice to come back after all this time and discuss the film and give our thoughts, what we thought of it at the time, and how our perspectives on the film has changed over years and how it impacted movies that came after it and stuff like that. So it was really neat to do. So this video is kind of a companion piece to that one. Now, when I saw Batman 1989, when I saw the film, I had no idea who Michael Keaton was. So I went in, and this was the first Michael Keaton movie I had ever seen was Batman. Now, at the time when Michael Keaton was cast as Batman, it was very controversial. There was a lot of controversy around it. And now at the time, I had no idea about this controversy. And I never became aware of it till probably like early to mid 90s. And I became aware of it through reading Wizard magazine. And now when I became aware of it at the time, I had seen more Michael Keaton movies and stuff like that and became more knowledgeable of Batman and all that kind of thing. So it made sense. But at the time, he was just Batman when I saw this movie, and that was it. Now, Batman is not my favorite Michael Keaton film, but it is the film that made me a fan of Michael Keaton and made me want to seek out his other films. So this video is the top 5 Michael Keaton films that are not Batman 1989. So I'll start off with number 5, The Paper. Now, The Paper is about this newspaper man played by Michael Keaton, and he loves his job. He loves the newspaper business, and he is just totally into it, and he loves where he works. But it's putting a tremendous strain on his marriage because his wife is now pregnant, and they're expecting a baby. So she wants him to take this other job at a more prestigious newspaper outfit that will give him basically a better role where he will have a higher pay and less hours. So he'll get more pay and he'll be able to spend more time with his family. So he's going to do this, but then he comes across this situation where 2 black teenagers are in the wrong place at a wrong time and are framed for a murder that they didn't commit, and it's being covered up by the police. So Michael Keaton is trying to do a story on this, and he wants to get enough evidence in place so he can break the story and clear their name. But another competing person in the same paper that he works for, they want to run the opposite story. So whichever story comes out first, it's going to either condemn the boys or save them. So it's a race against the clock type story. So what I like about this movie is it really shows the strain that it puts on the character and it puts on his marriage and how much he gives of himself to the newspaper business. And his editor, who's played by Robert Duvall, he's like a mirror image of Michael Keaton's character, but further down the road. So he's at the end of the road that Michael Keaton is heading down. So he's got cancer, he's divorced, he's alienated his kids, and he's got a daughter he's trying to reconnect with, but is having a real hard job doing it. And all this is because he gave so much of himself to the newspaper business. So Michael Keaton, if he doesn't change, he's headed down that exact same path. So I thought that was like a cool thing in the movie, and really good movie, really liked it. So number 4, Beetlejuice. Now I'm more of a fan of Michael Keaton in dramatic roles and comedic roles, but this is the exception. I love Michael Keaton in this movie. He totally disappears into the role of Beetlejuice, and this is probably one of my favorite Tim Burton films. It's just like it's a great movie, and I like the rules that the world sets up with the ghosts. How they can't leave the house, how they're kind of trapped in there, and how the whole afterlife works and everything. I thought it was a really clever movie, and just loved it. And it's actually pretty famous. And this actually came out before Batman, and I think this got him the role of Batman because he worked with Tim Burton on this before he did Batman. And I actually seen this probably a couple years after I'd seen Batman, but I've seen it quite a few times since over the years. Now, the next movie, number 3, is Spotlight. Now, this movie is a newer one. I saw this one recently, but I really like this film. Now, the thing about it, though, it's got really heavy subject matter. So what this movie is about is a character Michael Keaton plays. He's part of a journalistic team, And what they do is they'll take a story and they'll do a deep dive on that story, and they'll take like a year to really investigate it, really dig into it, and do like a big story on it. And their section of their paper is called Spotlight. And so in this movie, a story comes across their desk involving the Catholic Church. And it involves molestation within the Catholic Church. So they decide to do a deep dive into the story, and they really open up a can of worms, and they get a lot of resistance from the neighboring, from the community, because the community they're in is very Catholic, and the Catholic Church has a lot of power in that community within the government and businesses and everything. So they hit like a lot of brick walls, and they get a lot of. It's a really good movie, but it really hits close to home because it parallels a lot of real life news stories. So in part of Canada I grew up in the province of Newfoundland, there were a lot of these stories that came out in the late 80s and early 90s about molestations going on within the Catholic Church. And in the province of Newfoundland, there were, what I can remember, there were two really big stories. One was Father Hickey, who was a high-ranking member of the Catholic Church. He was charged and accused of molesting children, molesting young boys and stuff, and then later on pled guilty. But when this story came out, it was huge because he was very high up in the Catholic Church, and it was a huge, huge story. It seemed like the story went on for years when I was a kid. Back, and this was like probably late 80s, early 90s. And then the second big story that came out, which really mirrors this movie actually, is Mount Cashel Boys Orphanage in Newfoundland. There was a huge investigation by the RCMP in the late 90s. In the late 80s, early 90s, into the Mount Cashel Boys Orphanage, because a lot of people had come forward, and they were accused of, the Catholic brothers who ran the orphanage was accused of sexually molesting and physically abusing the boys in that orphanage. And this scandal went on for years. It went years and years back. There were people that were, grown men who were coming forward and telling their stories about when they were there in like the early 80s and 70s and 60s, and went back. It was a huge, huge scandal. And what's interesting is it really paralleled the events of this movie, because like at the time, the Catholic Church was extremely powerful back then as well. So there were members of government and business and everything that knew this was going on in Mount Cashel and didn't do anything about it, because the Catholic Church at the time was so powerful. So what I liked about this movie is it really shined a light on a very real, dark issue. And but besides that, it is a very good film on its own, and it's one I'm definitely would watch again in the future, and would even consider buying on Blu-ray or 4K. So number 2, The Founder. So when I first heard about this movie, I thought, how's this movie going to be any good? It's about McDonald's. Like, how's that going to be interesting? And then I saw the movie, and I just loved it. Michael Keaton as Ray Kroc, he just totally disappeared into the role. He even changed his voice and everything. I never thought like the story behind how McDonald's got founded would be so interesting. But I always like stories like this about businessmen, like powerful businessmen going against each other and trying to cut each other's throats and stuff like that. So there's other movies like this, like Glenn Ross is another movie I really liked. And it was interesting to see how Ray Kroc went up against the McDonald's brothers for control of the company and stuff like that. It was a really good movie. And it's got like what I call high rewatchability, this movie. When I saw this movie in 2016, it was probably outside of the movies I normally talk about on my channel, like science fiction, superhero, stuff like that. It was, when it came to like dramatic movies and things like that, movies that are just fiction, The Founder was probably the best movie I saw that year, hands down. And I remember I watched it the first time by myself initially and loved it. And a week later, rewatched it a second time with my girlfriend. Then a week after that, rewatched it a third time by myself again. Just loved the movie. And definitely would consider picking this up on Blu-ray at some point in the future. So number 1 on this list, my number 1 favorite Michael Keaton movie of all time is Clean and Sober. So this was a movie that I became aware of because reading articles about Michael Keaton and stuff in magazines, and this movie would always come up. So I knew about it for quite a few years before I actually seen it. So I picked up this movie on DVD in like the early 2000s, like 2001, 2002, somewhere in there, and had never seen it, but heard it was a really good movie. So I just bought it, brought it home, watched it, and loved it. And watched it quite a few times since then. And so basically what this movie's about is Michael Keaton plays a real estate salesman who has a drug and alcohol problem, but doesn't realize it. Like, he doesn't realize this is a problem in his life. And so he gets into a lot of trouble at the start of the movie. So the start of the movie, he's in bed with a girl that he picked up at the mall, and they went partying, done a bunch of cocaine together, and she ODs on cocaine and has to go to the hospital. And then there's some other stuff that happens to him in the movie. Besides that, he gets in trouble with embezzling money and all this kind of stuff. And it's all linked back to his addiction problems. So what he does is try to basically hide away from his problems. He goes to rehab and tries to convince them that he's a drug and he has an addiction problem with drug and alcohol. But he doesn't think he does, but he actually does. Well, what I like about this movie is it has a really fantastic, a really good character arc. The character starts off, he's just like a real POS. He's just a total scumbag, and you got no sympathies for him at the start of the movie. And then as the movie goes on through the movie, at the end of the movie, he is a completely changed character, and he goes through a really good character arc. And what I like about it is he changes at the end of the movie, but he had to pay like a really heavy price for that change. And he still has to deal with the ramifications of his former lifestyle as a drug and alcohol addict. And it's kind of like what's interesting about the movie is in the 80s, cocaine was really big, and it was like the rich man's drug. So when you thought of people that did cocaine in the 80s, the character he's playing in this movie is basically the guy you thought about. Like big business guys partying it up, and movie stars and stuff like that. And there were like a lot of cocaine scenes in movies in the 80s, which show this big lavish party and show all these people snorting cocaine and stuff out there. So like this is like that's kind of like the image cocaine had in the 80s. It was like this glamorized drug. So this is a really good movie. And I've actually watched this movie with people that I know that at the time had drinking problems and had recovered from drinking and drug problems. And when they watched that movie, after the movie's over, they always looked at me and said, hey, there's a lot of truth in this film. So that's why and I've watched it like a ton of times over the years. And that's why it's number one on this list. Now, there were a few other Michael Keaton movies that didn't quite make it on the top 5 list, so I'm just going to run through some of the runner-ups. So, SpiderMan Homecoming. Now, I really like SpiderMan Homecoming. It's not my number one favorite Spider-Man film, but it would probably be in the top 5. But as Michael Keaton movies go, this is like more of a Marvel movie than a Michael Keaton movie. And but Michael Keaton is one of my favorite things about this film is him playing the Vulture. I thought it was really neat that he got a chance to come back and do some more superhero stuff after he had done Batman. I thought that was really cool. But there were just other movies on the list that I thought were way better and more important, I guess, like Spotlight and The Founder and things like that. The next one is Pacific Heights. Now, if I had made this list like a few years ago, this probably would have made it onto the top 5, but after seeing some of the newer stuff that he's done and how good it was, this got knocked off the list. Now, one thing about Pacific Heights that kind of drags the movie down a bit, I find, is Melanie Griffith. Because I don't think she's very good at acting, and her and Matthew Modine are a couple in the movie, but they don't have very good chemistry at all. But all the Michael Keaton stuff is fantastic. So Michael Keaton basically plays a psychopath who gets into people who have rental properties, gets in on the property, and then they have a really hard time to get him out. And by the time they do get him out, he's destroyed their lives. He's robbed them, he's ruined them, and he stole their identity. So he does this to the couple of Melanie Griffith and Matthew Modine in the film. But he does a really good job of playing a psycho. And this is another movie that I've watched quite a few times over the years. Now, the next one is One Good Cop. Now, this movie, I just found it at Walmart in a bin for cheap. So I just, Michael Keaton's in it, so I haven't seen it, picked it up, brought home, watched it. And I did like the movie when I watched it, but it's a movie that when I watched it once, I never had a desire to watch it again. Like, so if I ever get in the mood to watch a Michael Keaton movie, I'll either rewatch one of the ones that are already on the top 5 list, or just watch one that I haven't seen yet. But I never get the urge to go back and watch One Good Cop. So that's why I didn't put it on the list. The next one is kind of the same thing. And this one might be a bit surprising. Is Birdman. Now, I saw Birdman in theaters, and when I saw it, I really liked Birdman. And I thought it was interesting because of how the movie kind of parallels Michael Keaton's own acting career, and in the fact that this is the movie that kind of got him out of the slump he was in. And he came back and got back into like the A-list. So after Michael Keaton had done the Batman films, his career kind of took a slump for quite a while, and he'd done a lot of straight-to-video stuff, and a lot of the movies he was doing, they weren't that good as some of the stuff he like what he was in the 80s. He kind of lost that. He wasn't on top of his game like he was. And then he did Birdman. And now Birdman's character is basically the same thing. His character had played the superhero Birdman in a bunch of superhero movies, and then after he was done the Birdman movies, the character's career went into a huge slump. So it was kind of cool that Michael Keaton did a movie kind of mirroring his own life in acting that kind of mirrored his own experience, but it was the movie that brought him back on top. And that's how he went on to do The Founder and Spotlight and got into SpiderMan Homecoming and stuff like that. So those were my top 5 Michael Keaton films that are not Batman, but I discovered because of Batman. Now this is a list that, if I revisit this list several years down the road, it's always up for changing, right? Because there's a lot of Michael Keaton movies still out there that I haven't seen, and Michael Keaton's still making more movies. So there's still more movies that he hasn't made yet that have to be seen, and this list could change. But for right now, it is what it is. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one. Thank you to all of my subscribers, and thank you for watching this video. And if you're new to the channel, like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to hit the bell icon for notification when new videos are uploaded.